Good morning to everyone. So let me just share my screen. So first of all, I would like to thank Zinnov for providing this platform for expressing my thoughts and opinion on these topics. And as Priyanka said, that the topic for today is AI/ML enabled security intelligence and inward-looking approach. And this is probably one of the most talked about or discussed topics within the cybersecurity industry today. So without further delay, let me jump into the contents that I hope to present and discuss in front of you. So I will probably take a couple of minutes to discuss about Sony and the company that I represent within Sony India Software Centre. Then there are a couple of points which I would like to highlight under disclaimer, which is important, and I think all of us who attend such kind of seminars would be familiar with. And then we dive into the core part of the presentation. It's divided into two parts or sections. The first part, where I would talk about a couple of slides on how to build a AI/ML competency within the cybersecurity division, and that's what the inward-looking approach stands for. And then I have selected a couple of use cases which I thought would be relevant for the audience here, and probably share some of my thoughts and views on architecting those use cases and collaboration with the AI/ML competency to produce the end result. And finally, I have around a couple of slides on advantages, challenges, and the summary of the topic for today. So moving forward, again, most of you may know that Sony was established back in 1946 as an electronics company. We started manufacturing, I think, tape recorders and then the iconic Walkmans. I think this was one of the products which was really loved by everyone back in the day. And we are also known for cameras. And in India specifically, everyone knows us for TV. So however, over the years, if you can see on the chart on the left, we have actually diversified our business, right? So we are no longer only an electronics company. We work in games and network services, the famous PlayStation. We have Sony Pictures, which produces most of the movies in Hollywood and also in Bollywood. Recently, you might have heard the news of collaboration with Z. And we have also a very big music publishing company, Sony Music. Apart from that, Sony also is a world leader in producing semiconductors, which comes under the imaging and imaging solutions of the company. And not many of you may know, but Sony also has a lot of stake in financial services, but primarily based out of Japan. So this is a brief in terms of what we do. On the right-hand chart, of course, you can see the breakup of the revenues over a period of, I think, a couple of decades. And to know more about Sony, you can log on to the public report, which is corporate report, which is available through this website, which I think you can refer to the slides later. Now, coming to Sony India Software Centre, this is part of the Sony Group, the company that I am representing today. And this was set up in the year 1997, primarily to focus on the embedded software development, which is the product development side of things, and also on application development and support. So this was primarily set up because of these two reasons. But then over the years, we have also started working on information security or cybersecurity for the last 5-6 years in a dedicated way within Sony Group. And we have 3 primary divisions within Sony India Software Centre. What we call as SARD, GISC, and InfoSec. So SARD is the software architecture division, which again focuses on next-gen product development and testing. GISC is the global information systems and communications, which is the application development, maintenance, and they are pioneering automation within the Sony Group. And we have InfoSec, which is the cybersecurity division of Sony India Software Centre, where we help protecting Sony Group's different companies within Sony Groups from different risks, vulnerabilities, and threats. So this is, a very short description of what we are in Sony and what we do. And now I will quickly move on to the disclaimer slide. So anyways, you can read on the screen, but I would like to highlight 2 points here. The first point is the views and the opinions that I express here is completely based on my practical experience, research, and the knowledge that I have gained. May not be attributed to Sony, SIC, and its affiliates. And the second important point is I represent the cybersecurity side of the prism, right? So I will probably mainly be talking about the design and the functional aspects of the use cases in generic terms. But there is also an AI/ML aspect of things which I will touch upon, but at a very high level. So if you have any technical queries related to AI/ML part, please feel free to write to me directly. I have my coordinates at the end of this slide, or you can send it to Priyanka so that I can take it offline for responses. And the rest are standard things which I'm sure most of you would have come across. So without further ado, let's jump into the core part of the presentation. So in the first section, I will try to bring about how organizations can create an AI/ML competency within the cybersecurity divisions, which is what I call as an inward-looking approach. Cybersecurity, as most of us know, that is today is one of the most hot topics, or I would say most talked about topics in every industry, in every function. So everyone wants to use AI/ML. Everyone wants to use AI/ML for leveraging their work. Cybersecurity is no different, but most of us, particularly who are in the leadership positions or cybersecurity executive positions, know that if we go to ask from our management budgets related in creating a team within cybersecurity industry or function which focuses on AI/ML or automation, probably it's a very tough challenge to convince the senior management or the company management on it, because the skills that we are talking about is nowhere related to cybersecurity. So it will be very difficult for us to convince and show them value of why do we want to invest in such a team, because it is not only about creating the team, we have to operationalize the team, the platform, the retention. So it comes with the entire all the aspects of operationalizing a team. Now, due to this, most of the executives go outside and look for solution, or which is what we call off-the-shelf products, right? And there are no doubt there are products in the market which are available, which would address, I would say, some of your needs within the cybersecurity realm. But what I am trying to argue or suggest here is there a better way of doing things by looking inward within your own organization, right? So there are a couple of points to this argument that I would like to put forward. One is if you have cybersecurity requirements within your organization which are mostly real time, right? So today we are moving away as an industry from compliance driven function to a more risk driven function. So if we have to put risk at the center of our thought process, right, we need to make sure that we make the correct decisions, and for that we need visibility. And most of these CISOs wants to have real-time visibility on the risks, on the operational risk, on the strategic risks that they have. But how is it possible? How do we create that, right? There is a question that we have. It is not only a one-time use case. There can be multiple use cases which the cybersecurity team would like to implement and would like to deliver and have visualization on. But it is not possible to go ahead and look for products off the shelf for everything on the market. Neither it is available. So it becomes important to see how we can sustain. The key word I would say is, once we create such an operation, to sustain that operations and make it operationalize in the long run. And for that, I think we have to look at a solid, business case. We have to create a business case which would convince our management to go ahead and, evaluate that approach of creation of competency rather than going outside. So in the next slide, I am going to talk about in what scenarios or in what, how at a very high level we can actually create such a competency, and where to look for when we look for such a competency within our own organizations. Again, what I said is this is completely based on my experiences. So the real scenario would differ from case to case basis in your own organizations. So the first point that I would like to stress upon is equal stakeholder for success, right? So today, I have primarily taken the example of IT in this particular slide, but it can be anyone. So you can have in your own organization, you can have a separate team which looks for automation on AI, ML, and stuff like that. So it need not be only IT, but I have taken the example of IT because it is the most commonly related workforce which work with the cybersecurity teams. So it would be probably more relatable to all of you if I take that example. So if you look inward and carefully enough, probably you will find that your IT teams would have already created such competencies related to automation or AI and ML, right? So because, as I said, AI ML is not restricted only to cybersecurity industry. It is required everywhere, and everyone is trying to leverage that capability to to make meaningful decisions and automations and increase operational efficiency. So if you look carefully enough, you might find teams internally who already have that kind of capability. Now the question is, how do we then collaborate with them to make this a project, operationalize the platform, and also look at sustainability in the long term? So you have to, there is no, just like you would probably talk on this with a third party vendor, I think you can also do the same with the internal organization or internal departments. But the only key difference that I would like to highlight is the department that you are collaborating with to create that competency will be equal stakeholders for success, right? A third party would probably come in, deploy the solution, configure it, and leave it to you to operationalize and provide the know-how and leave. That company probably will not be an equal stakeholder for success. But the key for us to make this a success is to make the IT teams, in this case, again, I am repeating just as an example, to make sure that they are equal stakeholders for the success of the project and the competency that we are envisaging. Now, traditionally, you would agree with me that the role of IT teams have actually changed. So most of the SecOps work that we see in the industry or within the companies today, the security tools, the operationalizing of the security tools, the maintenance of the security tools are actually done by IT teams, while the cybersecurity teams look at the governance part of it, right? So that's the kind of collaboration which is already happening in most of the organizations and industry. And it makes so much sense to actually take forward that collaboration and implement it in something like AI ML competency. So that is the first step I would like to highlight, or first point that I would like to highlight, whether it is an IT team or any other team within your organizations which have already developed that competency, right? Please look at that and see if there are internal arrangements which can be made and make them equal stakeholders for success, and try to establish a COE kind of a thing within your own cybersecurity division. The second point which I would like to highlight is, within your own cybersecurity teams, you must have people who are subject matter experts and who have the knowledge of a variety of information security domains like incident management, risk management, vulnerability management. This is where the use cases comes from mostly, who would be part of the core team, right? So you have a AI ML team, which is part of your team, but can be considered as an extended arm. They can be from any other division of your organization. And then you have your own core team, which is leading the efforts in establishing the effort, right? Establishing the COE, who should have knowledge in the core areas and functional areas of InfoSec domains. Now, the other aspects which I would like to stress upon is it is just not enough for the cybersecurity team to only know cybersecurity, right? So what I have seen is, if you want to make sure that the collaboration is done well, then the conversation has to go beyond beyond cybersecurity design of use cases, and even to the extent where you collaborate with the AIML teams or the data scientists to actually understand and find out which algorithms would probably fit in the right mix within the use case that you are developing. Most of the times what happens is we do our bit and we leave it to the data scientists to figure out which would probably work better. But this is something which I think may not be the correct way of addressing this challenge. There might be a lot of collaboration which might be required on a day-to-day basis, including on the technical aspects of the AIML, where the cybersecurity team should at least have a foundational knowledge. Now, to build that, what in my experience I have seen is there are a couple of courses. Again, you might have a better choice. I'm not kind of endorsing any of this, but this is what I have found in my experience very valuable. Is there is a Microsoft course on AI, which they call as AI 900, which is again very the fundamentals of AI on Azure, I would say. Then there are a couple of very good LinkedIn courses, the LinkedIn learning courses, which I came across. One which is called as AI for Cybersecurity, and the other for AI Foundations. So this would be good enough for any cybersecurity subject matter expert. So again, I stress you need to have someone who would have knowledge across the domains as part of the core team. You can have an extended team within your cybersecurity who might be subject matter expert on only a specific thing, maybe the VM part, maybe the IM part, but the core team should have someone who had knowledge across. And if they go through a couple of these courses, I think this should be enough with their knowledge to actually have a little bit of idea on conversations that the data scientists have in terms of which algorithms and what to select to execute the use case. So that's very important, which is point number 2. The last point which I want to highlight is, I again want to draw your attention back to the point where I said that it is very difficult to convince senior management to show value of something like this, right? So how do you show value? In theory, you create a business case, you create a team, you create a org structure, you create internal OLAs with the IT teams and go and talk to the management and this is something ready. But until and unless you have a workable POC, which demonstrates that yes, if the POC is working, that means obviously the collaboration has worked and everything is in place. Of course, not everything, but the important things which are required to deliver this is already in place. So don't just focus on the theory. You have to convince the management on the POC part after you develop a successful POC and demo it to the management. I think once you do that with a couple of use cases or even one use case, I think that should be good enough for some buy-in from the management to take it forward. And once you have the buy-in, then obviously you have the budget and investments and vis-a-vis looking at outside, I would probably touch upon some of the advantages and disadvantages at the end of my presentation for both. But it would probably make much more sense to them if you can demonstrate value and the capability to operationalizing such a team with an inward-looking approach. So that's what I wanted to share. In terms of what the management expectation might be. Now, before I go to the next section, I would like to probably end this particular, part 1 of this presentation by saying that, the global spending of security expenses across the industries is envisaged to somewhere USD 170 billion by 2022. That's quite a lot of money for a security division, which for most cases, within at least for the GICs that we represent, is not the core business, right? So it is an expectation from our management to continue to innovate and automate and become closer to business, have a risk-driven approach rather than compliance-driven, to ensure that the costs are within the budget and within the within the sustainability of the organization, so to say. So it is upon us to make sure that how we can find value and demonstrate value in such technologies within the cybersecurity realm. So this is what I wanted to conclude the first part of the presentation by drawing your attention to that one bit of information which I came across. Now, moving to the second section, where I would probably talk a little bit about the cybersecurity use case. So what we have done is we have selected few use cases, maybe four use cases from different domains of cybersecurity, and from those we have selected couple of use cases which I would probably go deeper in terms of how we can architect those use cases, how we can design those use cases, what would be the functional requirements, so on and so forth. So before I go into that, I would like to again share some, probably some news bit with you. There was an article which was published in August of 2021 on CSO Online, which says that amongst the 15 strategic priorities for CSOs or CISOs, automation is one of the most important priorities, right? Which CISOs are targeting. Again, I come back to the same topic that in the last 10 years, or maybe a little bit more, information security has transformed from being a compliance-driven organization where most of the rest of your organization, and I mean, most of you would have the same practical experience, is probably you would have been considered as a roadblock, right? You have to do this, that, before you actually get approval. That kind of mindset is now changing within us. And I think most of the organizations are becoming more risk focused, and they're investing in technologies and processes where it will make them much more risk aware and risk focused. And automation is one such technology, and intelligent automation in that is through AI ML is like the most useful in today's day and age for any organization to get visibility on real-time risks, right? So if you become risk focused, your decisions needs to be based on the risk. And if the quantification of the risk is a point in time exercise rather than a real-time risk exercise, then obviously 5 out of 10 times you are bound to make a wrong decision. That's why when we move to a risk-driven approach, we must ensure that we get a real-time visibility of the risks in terms of the use cases or the business cases that you are going to implement through AI ML technology. So that is a very important part of establishing this COE and then operationalizing this COE. Moving to the next slide. Now, some of the cybersecurity use cases. Again, I came through a very good article in Search Security, which has written that the top cybersecurity use cases that are of interest to the ops teams and the managers managing those teams are related to malware detection, network analysis, AI-based threat mitigation, and augmented analyst work. So, as you can see, that some of this focuses on operational efficiency, decreasing the level of human intervention, even in basic complex tasks, and some of them talk about advanced threat intelligence and malware detection, which can be classified under the real-time risk visibility bucket. So going by that thought, I have listed down few use cases. Again, these are by no means exhaustive. These are by no means representing any of or suggesting that you should implement or definitely consider them for your organization. These are just some of the use cases which I think is relevant to most of us in cybersecurity industry. Some of you must have already thought about it and have already implemented it in some shape or form. But I think at least having a discussion is worth within your organization to see how this can be treated or how this can be operationalized or implemented through machine learning. So the first one is, again, relating to making sure that low-level complex human jobs can be replaced by machine learning. The second one is also, so it talks about, operational efficiency, saving effort, making sure that you focus most of your attention of knowledgeable analysts to areas where it will give you much more value than just making them triage things. So the second one is also on similar lines. How can we use AI on third-party risk assessments, right? Third-party risk assessments, in most of our organizations, we have big teams. We have regular processes in which we do repetitive tasks, but a human is involved from years. Of course, it requires a little bit of complex decision-making process, but nothing that we cannot solve with AI. I'm not saying that the entire cycle of risk management needs to be replaced, but you will always need human beings to take decisions and do analysis. But at least the repetitive part which you have in your process, like the same kind of questionnaires, the initial questionnaires that we all send to vendors for standard responses, maybe 20% of that can be done by through AI ML. So something of that sort. Third use case is about real-time user and endpoint risk scoring. So this again talks about real-time risk visibility, and I will go in detail in this in the later slide. And the final one is again talking about removal of false positives, which talks about operational efficiency. And as you know, in most of the reports that we handle, whether it is IPS IDS, whether it is web scan reports, whether it is SIEM reports, we get a lot of false positives. And the SOC 1 analyst or level 1 analyst, they spend most of their time in actually sorting out the false positives and true positives. And in that, they might miss even true positives, right? While sorting out the false positives. And the most important thing is it delays decision making. It delays, if you are doing, let's say, vulnerability assessments, it delays the publishing of the report, which again impacts the business, right? Because they want to go live with the application as soon as possible. So again, here we talk about increasing operational efficiency. So I'm going to talk about in detail on real-time user and endpoint risk scoring and removing false positive in the next section of the presentation. But before I go there, the question that I want to, probably that we are going to address in the next section is, we know that these are use cases which are worth evaluating. But how do we do that, right? That's the question. Because we talked about one of the important things is to operationalize a team, create an infrastructure, have people who has those kind of knowledge. And we talked about that previously. Now, once we have the team, how do we actually technically, in terms of functionally and technically, make sure that some of this are implemented is what I am going to talk about next. So, if I have to talk about endpoint and user risk, you would already be aware that there are UEBA solutions, user and entity behavior analytics solutions, tens of them in the market already, right? So why do we need to invest time and effort in something by creating your own, right? So this is a question that most of you might have, and I have tried to address that in the last section again of my presentation. But I would like to touch upon one point. Is there might be use cases which you feel that there is a better solution in the industry which is existing, and so be it. We are not saying that we are going to develop anything unique which is not there in the market, but we also have to look at the cost and the effort that whether it is a viable solution for us or not. For example, in one of the articles I came across that the price range for UEBA solutions, right, kind of ranges from $2 per user to $80 per user. Now imagine if you are a mid-sized business having thousands of employees, and if you want to implement that, your cost will run into millions, right? And that's just the implementation cost. Maybe there are customizations cost, which are already there, which will be extra. Maybe there are costs associated with operationalizing the solution, which you need to factor in. So there is a huge cost aspect related to this kind of solution. The other aspect which I would like to highlight is customizations. Most of the off-the-shelf products, right, comes with limited customization options, and when we talk about a use case, most of us, when we start designing the use case, by the time we finish it, it what we think and what we actually kind of end up with is completely different, which means that, and that is quite natural, because as you go brainstorming, as you discuss, things are bound to change. You will find a better way to do things which you thought was a good way of doing in the last meeting. So these are quite natural, but obviously that would increase to your cost, your time, if you are looking for an off-the-shelf product. So these kind of things needs to be considered. And now coming back to the use case, now how do you deliver value by implementing this use case, right? One is you talk about the cost in front of your management. The other is, why are you looking at real-time visibility of the disk? So some of the areas where the getting a real-time visibility, I know that most of the organizations today are struggling to create a dashboard which would give them the visibility. That's the bare minimum, right? So I know that user A, user B has this risk, and he or she did something and the risk went up or went down. That's the bare minimum, right, which we want to do, and most of us are struggling in that. Now we don't even have time to look at the downstream processes that it would benefit if we have that kind of a dashboard. Like you can feed it to an event and incident monitoring response process. You can feed it to insider threat monitoring process and your anti-phishing campaigns, right? So I would take an example which I think most of you can relate to. So the example is related to anti-phishing, right? So we are all aware that we, in our organizations, whatever the size, we have an anti-phishing program. We have got all those people who don't care. They click. They are very curious. May not be necessarily intentionally, but due to curiosity, clicking on every email link that comes across. So what you do is you create awareness programs. You find out those people who clicked. You use tools like PhishMe or something else, and try to find out who are those people. You develop customized plans and programs for awareness, but again you run the program and you see the same people have clicked, right? And most of the times you would see that the list of people in a bigger organization might run in hundreds. So how do you plan? No team has that kind of time to invest in hundreds of people to make them aware continuously to not click, right? So there has to be a better way of dealing with these things. And at the same time, you cannot predict that they are going to click on any phishing link next, because the report that you have today only shows that these are the people who have clicked, and hence out of this 100 are probable to click next time also. So that's the human inference you can just infer from the report, nothing else. But a group of 100, as I said, logistically is impossible to concentrate on, right? So is there a way where this kind of use cases, the end user, endpoint and user risk, can help you in predicting which are the users who are most, where the model will predict that these are the users out of the subset of those 100, and maybe you will see that it has come down to 5 or 10. So you can very closely monitor them. You can pass on their logs and historical browsing history to the incident management responses and say, hey, see, these are the 5 users which our model has predicted, and you might want to keep a tab on them. And if just in case they click a real phishing link. So this kind of things today is just simply not possible, because the volume of information we have, and also, to be very honest, we don't have the real-time visibility and the intelligence. So related to that, this might be very helpful. So now ML has made that kind of analysis possible for all of us. We can get the data, and I would probably talk a little bit about how to do that in the next few slides. We can choose a model. The model can then predict and give you an output that this is the risk score of the user. And the other important point is, when you talk of user, you must understand that the user and the endpoint is together. I mean, you can't segregate the user from the endpoint that it is using and then calculate the risk, right? It doesn't work that way. So you have to also consider the risks associated with the endpoint, right? So whether there are vulnerabilities existing in that endpoint or laptop or desktop which is not patched. Are the Windows patches latest? Do we have tools installed which would detect ransomware or malware? So this, in concatenation with the user behavior, will give you a picture of the end user risk, right? And that is what you need to monitor on a continuous basis, on a real-time basis. Now, having created the preamble for what we need to do, the question is, how do we do that, right? So it's all good looks, it looks all good in theory, right? So this is how you need to do, this is what you need to focus on, these are all these things. But then how do you actually do that? How do you in operations do that, is something that I want to discuss at a high level in the next slide. So again, what I have listed here is based on my understanding, and it is no way that this is the only way that I am saying is possible to execute and implement such a use case. You might find a better way. You might already have a better way, who knows? But this can be one of the possible steps which you can follow to arrive at that kind of result. So the most important challenge in any ML problem, and I'm sure there would be many data scientists in the audience today, and they would vouch for that, is the data challenge, right? So for any algorithm to learn, for any model to be trained, you need data. You need data which have integrity, which is uniform, and which is in a clean format, so to speak, for the model to be trained. And most of us within the cybersecurity industry, we know that that's the first and the biggest challenge, because if you are in either you are in a leadership position or you are in an operations team, you will always see that the dashboards of people are different. So one report which InfoSec or cybersecurity is seeing, and the other report probably the IT is seeing, is completely different when it comes to asset or when it comes to incident. So this is because the tools are not synced, the data is not, the source of the data where it is coming from is probably not correct, and it is not, there is no harmonization in that process. So what in my experience I have found is we have to do a lot of effort, right, in creating a data or in coming up with the data. And if you think that the raw data would probably, at least for the POC, that the raw data would be in its raw form which comes out of the tool and the would be good enough, I think that would be a mistake, because there are a lot of, I have seen people who have invested a lot of times in correcting the data along with the ML team to actually make sure that the model can predict something out of it or learn something out of it. So that's the first challenge that you need to address, right? And the second is, for how long do you collect the data? So you cannot collect the data for, let's say, only a couple of weeks, because normally for a model to understand, you must at least need 3 to 6 months worth of data. And the second thing is, how when you train the model, right? Particularly in this example of the endpoint and user security and user risk, you have to refer to some of the tools and technologies which produces those kind of reports and logs. So for example, if you look at user, what are some kind of logs and reports that I can refer to? Maybe you have a phishing tool which detects how many phishing attempts the user has reported, or the user has clicked. So those kind of historical data will give you a understanding of what is the behavior of the user. Then browsing patterns. How does what every one of us has a pattern, right? We come to office, we log into our systems, we go to probably a news site, we then check our emails, we then go and work on some of the work related sites. I may have a different pattern, you may have a different pattern. So again, so that needs to be considered. So browsing history is very important of when you look at the user behavior. Patching, when it comes to endpoint, you can look at the patching status. So we all have a CCM tools which deploys Windows patches. So we can look at that. We can look at that as an example. Then we can look at DLP reports. We can look at we can look at some of the endpoint reports. So for example, reports from Symantec, CrowdStrike, so forth. These are most of the popular tools which are deployed in most of the industry nowadays. So this can act as good data sources, right? So you have the data, you have to identify the data sources, make sure that the data is cleaned in a way along with the ML team so that it is acceptable by the model. Now, once you have that, you have to then identify that, how would the model be trained? And again, this is the technical part of things. So if you have an ML team, and one thing that I would like to stress here is what kind of model, whether it is a clustering model, whether it is a supervised learning, unsupervised learning, machine learning, deep learning, whatever it is. And under these categories, of course, you have got different kinds of mathematical algorithms which are used to train the models. It has to be done. It cannot be done by the ML team in silo. It has to be done by the, both by the team, the AI/ML team and the cybersecurity team, the subject matter experts, because the AI/ML team does not have the full visibility over the end-to-end functionality that you are trying to deploy, right? It is only us. So we need to make sure that we have that conversation with them, technical conversation as well if required. And that is why I focused on that part where we need to train our own teams to have basic understanding of ML technologies, AI/ML technologies. So that is very important. Now, once you have identified the model, again, as I said, I will not go in detail on what kind of models and what kind of algorithms. If you have any questions related to that, you can write to me. I can take it offline. Now, once you have done that, you also have to, in parallel, create a risk framework, right? So the ultimate objective of that model is to predict user behavior real time, right? But for that to happen, you need to assign a default value based on each of users' behavior. So, for example, I, as Kaushik, can have a risk value which is, a baseline risk value of X. Someone else can have Y. Someone else can have Z. So that risk value is your point of reference, right? And that risk value, in order to arrive at that risk value, you need to establish a risk framework. And that risk framework is, a function of all these parameters that you have put into the model for training, that in real life, in real time, you will encounter. So all that needs to be sorted out, and then a risk framework needs to be arrived at. And see, there is no formula to that. If you go online and look for different kinds of frameworks, how they are doing it, Metre framework can be one of the frameworks you can refer. I would say that you don't even need to do that. You can just, within the team, you can sit, brainstorm, and come up with a formula that works for you, right? You don't have to follow a certain pattern or a template which is used today. So this is very specific to the organization, I would say. And finally, the output, right? So you have now got the model trained, you have the framework. So the model gives you an output, and the output is based on the risk framework that you have defined. But you still need data, right? So where would the real-time data come from? So in POC, and I'm talking specifically about POC here, in real time, of course, all this would be integrated, and I will show you a high-level diagram in the next slide. But in POC, obviously, you have to create a replica of a real environment within the lab or in your POC environment to mimic the real-time data, so that when the data comes in, your model would be able to actually compare the current behavior of the user plus the endpoint with the baseline score, and then give you a score which might be higher or lower, right? So this is what is the idea behind how you can probably architect one of the this use cases. Now, in the next slide, what I'm trying to show is a very high level diagram of the same use case, right? So you have a data source layer where you have all the tools that you think is the best source of data, mostly endpoint tools, maybe proxy servers on user browsing history, maybe email security tools that you have in the industry. So those kind of things comes in your data source layer, right? In the second layer is where what you call how you ingest the data. And I'm on the left hand side, I'm talking about training the model. So that may not be real time. So you have to identify a SIEM tool, right? So most of the times, most of our organizations have a SIEM tool, where all the log reports, which are primarily required for this kind of work, are fed into. So, and if there are some tools which does not integrate with your SIEM tool right now and is mandatory for this use case to be executed, then I think you have to look at that as well, backend, that integration as well. So after doing that integration, your SIEM tool can actually become a source from where all the data can be ingested to your model. Once that is done, and once you've identified what algorithm to use to train the model, you can actually run that, and it takes about a week's time, as I understand, for the model to train. And if you give it a good amount of data set, around 3 to 6 months of clean data that you have identified, I think a week's time would be good enough to train the model. And then you have the baseline user risk score, right? And then when you ingest real-time data on top of that is where you are going to see the deviation. And the output of that can be in any form, right? So it depends, right? So what is the specific use case that you are looking for? Is it to give a real-time visualization to your SOC analyst? So be it. You can design a dashboard that is completely doable. If you are looking to ingest data as an output from this AIML system to downstream incident management tools or processes, then you can get the data in form of CSV or XLS. So whatever works for you and whatever specific purpose you are designing the use case for can be done and can be executed from this architecture. So this is what I had to cover in the first use case. I have another use case as well, and I think I have another 15 to 20 minutes. So I will try to cover rest of the slides within that. So the next use case that we are talking about is removing false positives. So just one point before I go there. See, this particular use case that we talked about is about the endpoint, the real-time risk visibility, right? So I talked about that. I'm going to take one example of real-time risk visibility and another on effort optimization or cost optimization or process optimization. This example focuses on operational efficiency, so optimization of efforts. Now, how do we do that, right? So what is the business requirement and functional value? So for removing false positives, as I in the beginning of my talk, I said that when I was talking about all the other use cases, that removing false positive is a very cumbersome job for all the level 1 SOC analyst or even the vulnerability management analyst. It can be different kinds of reports. It can be a web scan report. It can be a report coming in from IDS, IPS, and it can also be a report from what you call the SIEM tools that we have, right? So in terms of one of the latest industry reports that I was reading from InfoSight, I believe, it says that around 40% of the data that we see within probably SIEM tools are actually false positives, which means that how much time would an analyst spend in bifurcating the true positives and the false positives? And in this effort, he or she can also, eliminate some of the true positives, because we are all humans after all, right? So is there a way, to remove, to make sure that some of this task, and I say some of this with a lot of understanding, because as I will tell you later, that in this particular use case, human intervention needs to be there for longer time. But can we reduce the effort to a certain extent? If we are making 40% false positives, can we bring that down to 20%? And can the human involvement remain in rest of the 20%? And then you pick that number up as you go up in months and years, and the model trains itself, and the accuracy percentage becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So now again, to that point, some of the possible steps that you can follow, you might have a different, much better way of doing things. But then I will probably take the example of SIEM because that is the most relatable one with all of us. The SIEM tools produces, as I said, around 40% of false positives by a research from InfoSight, right? So now, if that's the case, then how do we make sure that we develop a model which would help us with some of that false positive identification. So we have to look at, again, data, right? Data is everything. For every use case that you develop, data is the starting point. Without data, I mean, nothing is going to work out in AI ML. So the first thing is identification of data, and most of the times what I have seen is you might need both triaged and untriaged reports for this. So for example, triaged meaning where you have already removed false positives, and untriaged means that report has both false positives and true positives. So if you have an historical data of around 3 to 6 months of that kind of, that kind of data, if you have access to, then if you clean that data up along with the AI ML team, it might act as a good source for the model to be trained. Now, when you train the model, it is important that we identify what are the fields within that report, right? And it can be different for everything, right? Today, I am taking the example of the SIEM. Tomorrow, you might want to implement it for web app infra reports or web app reports. Who knows, right? So the report format would be different, the fields would be different, and the analyst human behavior or the human action that the analyst takes based on which fields will also be different. So for every use case, I mean, this particular use case can have sub use cases where you probably would have to think completely differently when you are implementing this. Based on for which report you are actually applying this particular model. So in our case, if we continue the example of SIEM, so we need to identify certain fields within the report, and again that will vary from tool to tool because there is no uniformity in the way of in the way that the SIEM tools provide reports. There will be some uniformity in the name of the fields, but obviously there will be no 100% uniformity. So you have to identify which are the fields which are of most interest to us, right, to train the model, and that can be done again based, during the discussion with the ML team and the cybersecurity experts from your side. Once it is done, the ML team will be able to tweak the data, right? They would probably suggest, okay, we might use X algorithm for that, Y algorithm for that, and this use case or that use case, or sub use cases rather. And based on the discussion, you would have identified algorithm. And the data, which is this triaged and untriaged report, which is clean because there definitely would be some integrity or something which we need to do. That report can be fed into the model. Once the model is fed with that report, the model will start to. The idea is that the model will start recognizing patterns in SIEM reports where it can be classified as false positives, right? And once you have done that, and you have to constantly measure the accuracy, right? And as I said earlier, that the human involvement or the manual intervention is not intended to go down initially from day one. Probably it will take few months for you to make sure that 20% or 30% of the analyst's efforts are being leveraged somewhere else now, real-time basis. To reach to that stage, I think it will take some time. But at least even if we could reduce that 20% or 15%, depending on every organization, that itself is, a case worthy of, implementing this use case. Because imagine the daily reports, the volume of the reports that you have to go through. Imagine the number of web scans that you do, the infra scans that you do. So obviously it makes sense to optimize in that regard. So that's the strategy that you can follow in designing this use case. Now, again, a very high level, I would say architectural diagram. The historical data, which can be, scan reports, firewall logs, IDS, IPS logs, or SIEM logs, and then you train the model, and then the real-time part will give you some sort of triaged report, which is not completely triaged, but at least from 40% you can come down to, let's say, 30%, and then to 20%, so on and so forth. But again, I think in this final use case, I would again like to reiterate that this part is very important, right? So it all depends on what kind of algorithms we choose, and that is very important to have a discussion between the two teams, between cybersecurity and AI/ML, and cannot be left with only AI/ML. So we need to ensure that our teams have the basic understanding of AI/ML as well, which is very difficult, to get that kind of a level or that kind of an understanding. I also understand that, but then we have to try, because that is the key to the success of your triage report being 50% accurate, as opposed to maybe 20% to 30% accurate, and then so on and so forth. So this point is very important in my mind. Now, I think this is the last segment of my presentation. So I will talk about the advantages, challenges, and summary. So by now, hopefully you've got an idea of how to architect the cybersecurity use cases, and how to develop a team, how to look inward to create a AI/ML competency, and what kind of people that we need, what kind of skills we need even in our own teams to make this a success. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that this is the only approach that will work. I'm not making that kind of a sweeping statement, but I am trying to bring out some of the advantages where you can look at inward-looking approach. Then I will talk about some of the challenges which I think you will face if you take an inward-looking approach. And then at the end, I will present a couple of points on the summary, is what would be the best way to look at that. So the first point is, if you are leveraging the inward approach and using a team, which is, within your organization, of course, then you have access to the core competencies of each other, right? You have a lot of discussion, you have opportunity of a lot of brainstorming, and people will go extra mile to deliver that. If you make them equal stakeholder for the success, which I discussed initially, then obviously people will be, very excited to contribute to such a project. So core competency is very important, is where, you show that as a collaboration success, right? Between your teams. Second is access to broad skill base. You remember what I said, that it's not easy to get budgets from the management if you want to create your own teams within AI, within cybersecurity. This is a much more convincing use case for your management, because management knows that if this is a success, we are probably using a competency which is being built by another section of the organization, and then using that competency to deliver results within cybersecurity. Now, that is something which I don't think any management will disagree with. So that's another advantage. Third advantage is, AI/ML competency can be leveraged for a broad base of security use cases. Remember, I said that there is a choice for the CISOs to go and buy off-the-shelf products, but then there is a cost versus benefit kind of a argument there as well. But again, you might have only 2 or 3 use cases today. In the next 2-3 years, you might have 15 use cases. Now, my question is, are you going to look for 15 different products in the industry to execute 15 use cases? Is it possible financially? Is it viable? Maybe not. That's a discussion point within the leadership teams. At the same time, do we also have availability of such products? So, for example, you might need it for a very specific use case within your own team, and AI/ML will greatly help you. Do I expect to find that kind of a product in market today? Maybe not. So again, it makes a lot of sense to actually invest within, right? Because you own everything. So you choose the use cases, and the vendor does not dictate which products, which use cases they want to, build their solution over. And of course, the last point, it is much more cost effective, right? So, you have to pay for the resourcing, the operationalizing of the team, the platform. But overall, if you can build economies of scale, so for example, vis-a-vis buying off-the-shelf products, if you can execute and leverage the same team and platform to deliver 10 to 15 use cases over a period of 2 years or 3 years, I think that's job done for you, right? That's where you can show a lot of value and benefit to the management. So these are the advantages. But let's look at some of the challenges of the inward-looking approach. So the first and foremost is demonstrating value, right? So As I said, AI/ML as a technology, unfortunately, has yet not caught up with the cybersecurity industry. Everyone in the leadership and in operations teams that they need to use automation, but everyone still I would say that it is not 100%. We are not 100% there, and in the maturity curve, people are every organization is at a different maturity curve. So demonstrating value in your own way, what works within your organization through a POC is the best way that I can recommend. But if something else works within your organization, definitely that can be taken up as well. Second point is, of course, I spoke a lot about it, which is the data challenge. This remains the single most challenge within every organization. The data problem is with all of us. So you have to find a way to deal with this, not only during the POC, but even afterwards. Because if the data in the real time comes in a format which is not acceptable, then obviously the model's accuracy will drastically come down, right? So you have to work a lot in the back-end system, which obviously you have to still work if you are going to a third party or a vendor solution. So, this is like, irrespective of whatever you choose, you have to still do. Third point is turnaround time. The challenge here is, on an average, in my experience, it might take 3 to 6 months for developing one use case with AI/ML. That might not be the case with off-the-shelf products, right? Because that is, for any particular use case, you are getting an inbuilt solution. It's, only these customizations that matter. And finally, the operationalizing. POC is easy, but operationalizing an internal team to maintain and support the platform and build the competency is something which, is difficult. And there has to be a lot of brainstorming, lot of collaboration, lot of harmonization between different teams. OLAs needs to be agreed, who will maintain the platform, who will do what. Because you need to be, sometimes when we are working with internal teams, we forget to look at it from an SLA perspective. But unfortunately, this is where we have to bring in all those things to make sure it is operationalized well. And finally, in the summary, connecting the dots, say that, every cybersecurity use case, you have to leverage the inward-looking approach. You might want to bucketize. So, for example, there are operational risks, there are strategic risks, right? In a CISO's book. Strategic risks, which needs immediate attention, but over a longer period of time, where a mature team needs to come in and, give that visibility. Maybe you can look at off-the-shelf products. And usually the number of strategic risks for any organizations will be very limited. Otherwise, there is something wrong. And operational risks obviously will be a long list, long list of laundry list of things that that you would have. I think the best way to do that is to look at the inward approach, because that is where you have a lot of customizations, lot of teams, lot of cybersecurity teams wants to do things which build dashboard which will give them visibility, and for that you don't need to go hunting for products which are available in the market. I think in-house competencies and inward-looking approach can probably serve that need. Second is customizations. While choosing, you might think that use cases which requires a lot of customization definitely can be looked at from an inward prism rather than an outward prism, because customizations, if you are envisaging a lot of customization, there is a high percentage of chance that it might not work if you are looking at outside product. And finally, demonstrating value, right? So wherever you get how to show value, I think all of us know we have to look at the POC, we have to look at numbers, numerics, number of, the effort you are saving, the amount of cost you are saving, where you are deploying the human workforce for much more complex decision-making processes. So those kind of things, I think you can look at. So in summary, that is what I wanted to present to you. This is the final slide. So in conclusion, what I think is cybersecurity will find a lot of use from AI/ML technology in the future, right? I would say organizations within the cybersecurity realm are yet to catch up, but the responsibility is on you and me as representatives of cybersecurity to actually find use cases, design and architect use cases within our own organization where we can benefit from AI/ML, and then convince the management that this is something which can work. And this is in my humble opinion something which can work, along with the off-the-shelf product approach as well. So hope in today's sessions, I was able to provide the audience with some more clarity on this topic, and I would cherish your valuable feedback, suggestions, and comments either now or you can write to me later. These are my coordinates, and thank you everyone for your time and attention today. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you so much for that presentation, and we do have a handful of questions coming in. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump right into it and prioritize some of the questions asked by the audience. I think first and foremost, before we get into some of the more technical ones, there is a question around the fact that the technologies and use cases that you shared were relatively more recent. So the question is more around how do you convince leadership to invest in these programs? Okay. And if you have any comments on that, that would be great.
Yeah. So again, I think I talked about this, but let me just bring that point out again. I understand it's very, very difficult to convince the leadership, but the only way I can recommend you is probably initially you might have to invest from your own have to create some sort of business case for the management to say that, see, I am going to need this kind of money and I'm going to execute this kind of POC. This is what is relevant for me. And if I can execute it successfully, maybe we can think of a much more long-term option. So initially, I think that approach where you create a business case first, go with the business plan to your management and exactly point out the financial support that you need. And in my mind, most of the times you can manage that within your own OPEX budget, because at the end of the day, we might not need all of the budget that we have. So you are not asking for additional funds. What you are doing is you are saying that I'm going to probably divert some of the funds here and run it as a POC for 6 months and then demonstrate this, how it works. And from there, we can decide a long-term strategy. That is something, which can work in my view.
Got it. Thank you, Kaushik. Next question is around if you'd be able to share a little more details as to how you went about monitoring insider threat.
Okay. So again, as I said, it is mostly what I presented and talked about is based on my experience. It is not that it is already implemented in my organization. But the use case that I talked about, the user and endpoint risk, will probably help you in that direction, right? So partly I talked about when I was talking about the user risk. You would have seen that the browsing history, I took an example of anti-phishing, right? So you can create, if you are only interested to look at insider threats, then you might only build a use case which is concentrating only on user behavior, not on the endpoint. But I, however, think that you should actually, combine both. But you can also take that as a use case and execute that and look at the patterns and create a baseline score for every user, a subset of user in the POC, and then real time build a dashboard to see, how is it differing from user to user. And then you can feed it also downstream to your incident management processes. So exactly within my own organization, I think we are at a very initial stage, so I wouldn't be able to comment. But that is an approach which definitely you can follow.
Got it. Thank you so much. Now, the next question is actually something you touched upon, and there are 2-3 questions around this, so I'll try to consolidate. But essentially, when you're analyzing data and user behavior, with user behavior analytics, while it can offer great insights and definitely help organizations stop potential breaches, there are also lots of privacy concerns, especially when it comes to stereotyping users and using their data, right? So how do you deal with this, and how do you ensure you don't end up breaching those privacy concerns?
That is a concern, actually. So I know I did not touch that point in the talk, but that is a very important point as well. So, what you have to do is, if it depends on what kind of organization you are. If you are doing it only locally, so only the India specific crowd is part of that, you might have to follow privacy laws which are applicable to India at this point, which is not much. They have not come up with privacy laws as of now. It is in draft stage, not yet vetted in Parliament. But there is something in the cybersecurity laws of India which talks about privacy. So you need to be careful. I think at this point, if it is only India specific crowd that you want to monitor, you might have to take their consent that you are going to record this this particular logs you are going to collect. And I think all companies do that, because this is not the only time that you would need a privacy consent for them to be given in terms of this use case. But it might be useful to validate that with a privacy expert within your group or outside of cybersecurity. Sometimes they are different, to make sure that you are not in loggerheads with any law. So that is one approach. But if you are doing it for across geographies, particularly in Europe and Americas, and now in Japan also, and probably some of the Asian APAC countries as well, then it's a different ballgame, because privacy is taken very, very seriously there. So you might have to, I think, read up few laws or very closely work with the privacy team and see to what extent they are the crowd there is much more aware of privacy. They will ask you more questions. You need to make sure that you have taken care of everything related to why you are doing this, why it is required, how will you use it in case of any breach, how will you disclose it. Even if they are your own employees, you need to do all those things. So I would say very, very close collaboration with the privacy and legal teams. If you are doing for outside India. Inside India, I think a session or a discussion and then coming up with the actions presently with the legal framework should be good enough.
Absolutely. And I think on the other side of things, as a user that's in India, I would think twice before giving any application access to everything, because now it doesn't matter what the app is for, they want access to your video and to your data, to your messages, etc. So totally understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kaushik. The next question is around, does the sequence of user actions have to be considered versus just the presence or absence of these actions? So are you modeling a recurrent neutral net attention layers or not?
Okay, so again, I maybe I can take the technical part of that question later, because I can respond to it offline later. But in terms of the the functional part of it, if it makes sense for you to have a certain kind of pattern in terms of the behavior part of the user, which you can already think of, right? So initially, when we were discussing of the POC, we did not look into those aspects, like the user will come here, it will click, and he does that, or that kind of step-by-step process we have not kind of analyzed. But definitely, it makes sense if in your own organization to do that, because there are different models based on which will come up, which you can use. So I think you talked about the neural net or something, right? So if that is something which will help with that process, I think you can do that. But typically, I think it is not, in my experience, that's not something which I would say is a mandatory that you should list step by step, right? So it depends on your own organization, the tools that you are using, the history of data that you have seen in terms of the patterns of user behavior. So those kind of things will be completely different in different organizations. So you have to decide based on that.
Got it. So thank you so much. So what we'll also do, and even to who asked this question, we'll definitely send you it offline, Kaushik, as well. And if you can touch upon some of the technical aspects and get back, that would be
great. Sure. I can do that. So
the last question is around, for the false positive case, is building the data set manual. Okay. So if so, how many samples do you need for the data set manual to be accurate when you're looking at a false positive case?
It's very difficult to give you a number on that, because you have to continuously work with the AI/ML team and figure out what is the accuracy. So there are two aspects. I mean, I'm not a data scientist, but I know there would be data scientists in the audience. So they know that while training the model, you have to continuously check the accuracy of what the model is delivering as an output. So sometimes you have 80%, 90%, sometimes you have 50%. So you have to go back and tweak some parameters. You have to look at the quality of the data and do stuff. So I think before you actually work with real-time data, first is the data should be at least minimum 3 to 6 months, because that is the amount of data which is required for the model to actually make some decision, right? If you have a week's data, or let's say a month's data, it will still give you some output, but maybe it will give you 20%, 30%. Again, don't hold me on that number, but you will have to closely work. If you have given 3 months to 6 months worth of data, I think you will get efficacy or accuracy from the solution, which is close to 80% or above, is what my understanding. But again, depends on the quality of the data as well. So work very closely with your data scientist on that.
Got it. So absolutely on that point, Kaushik, my next question will be, especially with remote working and what the pandemic has thrown at us. Yeah. I'm assuming the criticality of info security now has become, irrespective of which industry you're a part of, it's become a big focus area, right?
Yes.
So I just want to check, when it comes to cross collaborations, especially assuming you have a big AI/ML team in your organization that's working on your product itself, do you have any tips and tricks on what you've learned in terms of cross leveraging those capabilities within an organization? So how do you use that AI/ML in your InfoSec kind of process?
So you were asking in context of COVID, what has changed?
Specifically because, of course, I'm sure the need has accelerated and it's been even harder from a remote standpoint, assuming we're going to be remote for the foreseeable future.
Sure. Yeah. See, I think, I will try to touch upon few points. COVID in a way has kind of forced us to embrace more and more digital transformation, right? So you have this, what you call, most of the companies now are going online because to make their business viable, they have to go online. Now, it comes with its own security risks. I will try to respond to your question based on some of the areas of InfoSec that we should definitely prioritize in these times and beyond post-COVID, and how collaboration will help, right, which I already talked about. So traditional security, right, which is today, the VPN-based security that we call, right, is no longer viable, right? You need to look at technologies like zero trust, which is a much more flexible or source-driven access model, which I would say. So, for example, the name only says like it trusts no one, zero trust. So you have to, every time you log in, it's not a VPN based access that you get one time and completely get access on the network in whatever application that you have access on, or which doesn't have a username password. So that kind of model will not work. The second is I talked about being more risk driven. Right. So for being more risk driven is where, you need to see those real-time risks. If you don't have accessibility to real-time risks, then how can you make risk-based decision? It is not possible. And some of the technologies that are going to help us to get that visibility is AI/ML. That's why you see automation is one of the 15 strategic points on any CISO's mind right now, because they want to go. You have to start with automation. It's a natural step. You can't directly go and create a AI/ML team, because it takes some time for your own people to understand what that is and what kind of use case can be made out of that. So they start with automation and then move to intelligent automation. And that's where I think what a lot of what I talked about in my presentation in terms of inward-looking approach or collaboration makes a lot of sense, because in operational risk, I'm not talking about strategic risks. Operational risks are very important. It gives you a lot of visibility on the security posture of your organization. And CISOs today wants a dashboard which will give them everything in one dashboard, right? You cannot do that until and unless you have real-time intelligence, you have automation, all that as a technology that you use. So this is very important, I think. And the other is, in terms of the incident response and the technologies that we use today on incident response, there is a lot of scope of using AI there. Both from a risk visibility perspective and also operational efficiency enhancement perspective. So operational efficiency is where free up the SOC level 1 tasks by completely automating, either through whatever it may be. It may be RPA, it may be custom script, it may be AI/ML, where some sort of complex decision making is involved, and then free up the resource to do something which is more valuable, right? Or more complex decision making. So these are some areas, I think, in terms of, if I have to sum it up, to get risk visibility in a post-pandemic world where you want to support the business with agility and with risk-based decisions, not compliance-based decisions, you definitely would need automation, AI/ML intelligent automation. And for that, particularly for the operational risks, I think it makes a lot of sense for the inward-looking approach.
Got it. Absolutely. And that brings me to my next question, just out of curiosity. Do you think there is an ideal solution wherein AI/ML can enable InfoSec in the most efficient way? So in other words, when I say that, do you think that the use of AI/ML in InfoSec is more effective for certain industry verticals versus others?
Yeah. So there are many use cases, some of which I talked about, where you can leverage AI/ML, and the use cases will vary based on industry segment and also very specific, particularly the operational risk perspective, very specific, to the organizations, right? Organization to organization. Strategic risks, if you are in the same industry segment, might be you will have a couple of strategic risks which are similar in nature, but not operational risks. Operational risks might be widely different. So in terms of whether there is an ideal use case, I think it would be very difficult to point out anything which is very ideal, but in terms of the cybersecurity industry, it will make a lot of sense for us to invest in areas, as I pointed out, reducing human intervention and getting more visibility in terms of the risk. But I think I would like to take one example where the process is much more matured, which is not directly related to cybersecurity, but indirectly through our PCI compliance. And I know there are organizations, particularly in the banking industry, where we have teams, who have a big PCI kind of an environment, PCI kind of compliance, which is the payment card industry. So I would like to take example of the banks where they have used for years now AI/ML to detect fraud management within the credit card transactions. So this is quite a mature process already. And although this is not directly related to cybersecurity risk, more towards financial risk, but if you are in PCI, which is a part of cybersecurity, you are bound to come across such solutions and such assessments in your working space. So that is one example I know where over the years the banking industry have used and have got matured in using AI/ML.
Got it. Thank you so much. And I think I'll have one last question in the interest of time, Kaushik. Just to conclude, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to any InfoSec team in India that's looking to work in this space, especially in today's environment? 3 pieces of advice.
Sure. So probably I would talk more in terms of generic terms within cybersecurity, not necessarily focusing on AI/ML, but focusing on technology. So the first, I wouldn't say advice, but suggestion that I can probably offer is this is happening already, but needs to happen much more. I think is as a community, as a cybersecurity community, we must move away from compliance-driven mindset to a more risk-driven mindset. In a way, COVID has forced us to do that. Even before COVID, people had realized this and they were already transitioning. But the impact of COVID has been so huge that, we needed to be much more agile. So people have already started to look at technologies, the processes, the human skills in this aspect to enable our teams and our community to support more and more risk-driven decisions, with shorter turnaround times. And the second is we need to look at a more collaborative approach within our own organization. So this is what focused in my talk, right? So we need to look at more collaboration. Look in terms of operationalizing solutions. Not everything needs to go out, and we need not go out and look for solution. If in any part of our organization something is being developed, and I heard this from one of the leaders is if something is being developed in any part of my organization, why can't we reuse it if that makes sense? For everything, we don't have to go out and buy a off-the-shelf product, and that is true even for cybersecurity. I only talked about AI/ML, but then there can be many other such technologies where you can have collaboration. So that is the second. And finally, I think shift left, right? We know that shift left is very popular now for software development, web applications, and security. But I think in terms of not only that, but in terms of risk management, in terms of security architecture, network security, third-party risk assessments, we need to be much more agile. We need to develop processes, adapt technology, automation, AI, ML, whatever it be, to make sure that we are nimble and we are able to support businesses with much quicker turnaround times from the beginning of the design phases, and not security is not an afterthought. I think it is already happening with a lot of maturity in the software development process. Most of the organizations are doing that, but there is still a lot of opportunity for improvement in third-party risk assessments or security architecture and few others. So not everywhere it is lagging, but I think there is still a lot of improvement required. And from our side also, we should be able to support those kind of things. So when they involve us, they expect quicker turnaround times, not a couple of months to do a risk assessment. So how can we use automation to deliver that expectation is what I would probably suggest our InfoSec and cybersecurity community to ponder upon.
Got it. Thank you so much. So I'll just quickly repeat those 3 points, Kaushik. The first was the fact that it's just super, super important, and it needs to be a top priority for orgs to be agile when it comes to InfoSec and prioritizing it, especially in today's day and age. The second thing you mentioned was the need for a collaborative approach within organizations to operationalize solutions. It doesn't always need to be outsourced. Yes. And the third one was just to shift left, right?
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us. I think that's all we have time for today, Kaushik. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for everyone listening in, I hope this session was insightful. If you do have additional questions that may not have been answered today, please do send them to us via email, and we'll try our best to translate them to Kaushik and get back to you on them. Also, please drop us a note for a link to the recording. And Amlesh, for you asking, we'll definitely be sending Kaushik's coordinates as well as the resource links that he shared with us to all attendees post the session. Thank you so much. Once again, Kaushik, thank you. It was amazing. Take care, everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks to everyone as well for listening. Thanks.